Samir, welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast.
Hey, Robbie, how's it going? Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a total pleasure. Looking forward to going in all kinds of directions in this conversation, as we did in our pre-recording chat. Um, but first of all, I'm going to start the way we start a lot of the episodes on the show. Where did you first come across coaching as a thing in the way that I do it now, and you support coaches?
Yeah, great question. My background is I started I studied engineering, studied machine learning, like one of the topics we'll get to is like AI, but machine learning is sort of like the thing behind the AI, like the science behind the AI in some ways. So I've been a software engineer or electrical engineer for my initial part of my career, but I became a manager and a head of a team, a few years in, like 4 or 5 years in, and I was very good at what I did as an individual contributor, but having taking over a team of 3 or 4 people, uh, I wanted to. I knew it was a different job. I definitely realized even more how much of a different job it was as I spent more time with it. But immediately I asked, like, hey, like, I know the company that I worked at the time called Mattermark. I asked my boss, who's the CTO, hey, I want to be a really good manager. Can we? Is there like coaching, consulting for helping managers? And so that was the first time we found. A firm that basically worked with us to offer 90-day like initial management coaching kind of sprint. That was like my first experience with coaching. And then I've been a founder for 2 different companies now. And since the after that first coaching experience, I felt like I was doing pretty well as a manager, as a leader, didn't delve back in until the pandemic when I felt like suddenly I was I had to lead a team remotely out of the blue of like 10 people, and uh, I felt kind of out of depths, I would say, from you know was I actually out of depths? I don't know, but like I felt like I couldn't manage or lead as well as I could with this really sudden shift, and so I reached out to some executive coaches, and that's where I've since then I've basically had an executive coach like for the whole 4 years. 2 different coaches who I've loved working with, but yeah, that's my kind of experience with working with coaches directly. Obviously, as you know, I'm a founder of a product that is an AI thought partner for uh, primarily focusing on coaches and consultants right now. So I've been working closely with coaches in that capacity too. But uh, yeah, like I will say, like initially after my first like stint of management coaching, it was definitely helpful. I wasn't sure. I was very skeptical of like long-term executive coaching. And then my experience with it when I was like, I really need some help trying to manage people remotely, completely changed my mind. So that's always that's always fun.
Yeah, yeah, and so much in there, Samir, and we'll get to like I'm sure we'll get to talking about the support you are giving to coaches now, and also I love the one of the things I was really interested in thinking about two of the things I was interested in thinking about when we were you know when I was researching and thinking about this conversation. One
Yeah,
is like, yeah, we'll get to that later. I think what you've seen from the outside, looking in at coaches as a profession and helping
right.
them, and I'd love to hear more about that. But I was also really curious because I knew you'd had a coach for a long time and was just really curious because mostly the guests on this show are coaches. And although
Right.
we have our own experience of coaching, most of us, I've been coached by a whole bunch of amazing people and made a huge difference to my
Yeah.
life, my work. It's rare on the show that I get to speak to somebody who's been in the thick of leadership challenges and the coaching they've
Right.
had. And you've named two like fantastic but different situations, like to some extent, which I have coached people in. That amazing
Right.
individual contributors to manage a step. And one
Yeah.
of the things I always think about when I hear somebody like you saying that, who's working in software development, I guess at the time,
Yep.
is that's not just, and it's often talked about as a thing that happens in tech companies, and it
Yep.
is, I've worked with people in those situations. But one of my jobs before I became a coach was working in training and development at the Royal Opera House in London. And I noticed it there as well, because you would
Yeah.
get a craftsperson, you'd
Right.
get an individual contributor who would become a
Right.
manager in the props department or the
Yep.
scenic design department or whatever it
Yep.
was. And they had exactly the same challenge, like amazing, you know, prop maker doesn't necessarily mean perfectly ready to run the
Wait.
whole shop,
Right.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's
Absolutely.
I love that reflection. What happened within that 90-day kind of getting up to speed? Do you remember like what you learned and how the coaching helped at that stage?
It's so long ago now. It's like 8 years ago, maybe 8 years ago. So, you know, uh, I'm trying to remember. I definitely really enjoyed working with my coach. She was a great mix because she was a coach, a part-time comedian, and she'd also been a consultant at a hedge fund. So had like this amazing combo of experiences that made me both so both respect like that she'd been there herself in some ways of being an operator, she'd been a manager, etc. I like people who don't take themselves too seriously, even if they're doing things, the serious things. So having that comedian background and like just like being a little bit more loosey rather than like serious. I mean, most coaches I've found is, or at least good coaches are now. But yeah, like at the time I was like, oh, is this gonna be some like really like sooty person that's like
Yeah.
these are the principles of management. And it wasn't that at all. And so that was awesome. And I think the coolest thing was kind of just like talking through my uh, perceptions versus reality versus like how to manage like some when I became a manager, I was basically there were different levels of people I was managing. One of them was a peer of mine until I got promoted. And so there was like the like very specific dynamics to like handle well. Like, is there some jealousy? Like, or what? Like, or am I just perceiving that? Or so they were like just like mental stuff. And then also just like, okay, if someone is underperforming, what's the right way to get them to perform? How do I help them without uh doing the job for them. One of the struggles I still have to this day, and I've been managing and leading for a long time, is being a really good individual contributor. And I'm good at a lot of things, so I find it hard sometimes to stop myself from being like, you know, for the company, the priority or the team or whatever, the priority is to get this done. So I know the shortcut path, which is I know the answer, give the answer, do it, versus no, like my job is to coach and mentor so that I don't always have to be giving the answer, or someone gets good enough to even come up with different answers that might be better than mine. And I struggle with that. And that was one of those things that like initially she identified pretty quickly. It's probably like a common thing with like um, high performing individuals who become managers. So like stuff like that, just like things that are unique to my situation and things that are very common across like high performing individual suddenly becomes manager. Whatever the profession is, like you said, it's probably the same. There's like the same problems.
Yeah, well, it's just making me laugh. I always think whenever I'm talking to somebody about that issue that
Right.
you're just naming. Did you ever watch Killing Eve?
Yeah.
Which is like, so there's a great bit in that where the older woman Russian assassin is talking
Right.
to Villanelle, and she
Yeah.
basically says something like, management is just watching people do things worse than you could do them. And that is for me what it feels like as well. And I can kind of hear that in your story there.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. And then part of it is like, okay, yeah, yeah.
Right.
That's definitely
The initial reaction, and then there's the
the initial
knowledge, right? There's the
reaction.
knowledge that there's more to it than that. It's not as simple,
Yeah,
and you can transcend and include it, but
and it's
that is what it
basically
feels
like,
like.
yeah. I mean, I think like getting to the point where you're like, okay, uh, is it okay that they will do things worse than you forever? If and like let's say their trajectory is they're still growing, so they probably won't be doing things worse than you forever. If their trajectory isn't growing anymore, is it okay the level that they've gotten to? It's good enough that they're still really good, but not like, I don't know. There's different things that everyone's good at, so is that okay? And so basically making the judgment call between we should probably let this person go, or invest in mentoring them is tough. Because eventually I think that's the call. Like, it's kind of binary at some point. It's like, are they good enough / growing enough that you think that they're useful to the team and the company, and someone that you think you can mentor, and you'll get joy out of helping them grow, versus they're maybe not growing anymore, and it's not good enough, and then you have to make that call.
Yeah, yeah, and
It's tough sometimes.
yeah, I can imagine, and of course in there is, I'm really aware that in that comment from the Russian assassin is like
Yeah.
a set of assumptions. It's her, right? If we're
Yeah.
being serious, then it's
Right.
her worldview or view on
Right.
the world that is the assumption that this person is doing it worse. And when I
Right.
think about those things as my business has grown and I've got different partnerships and people I work with in different ways, there's lots of there are questions that I'm asking. Some of them are the same as what you're asking. Some of them are just like, oh, am I happy for somebody, like, am I happy for this to does this really have to meet my ridiculously
Yeah.
high standards of
Yeah.
perfection? Or is it
Right.
actually fine that somebody else is doing this really well?
Yeah.
And better that they're doing it really well than that I'm doing it speech marks
Yeah.
perfectly.
Right.
And
Yeah,
there are
exactly.
so many parts of that. But I hear that particular leadership challenge as well, like especially in fast moving organizations. Like, if
Right.
if the pressure is on, there is a sense of actually sometimes it's the right thing to move people on, and you have to make those decisions when you're a leader. And I guess to bounce a little bit back to those 90 days, it sounds like, and I think this
Yeah.
is why coaching in those 90 days is so, or in that kind of situation is so valuable, that in a way even the general things like this one we've just been talking about, the best way for you to grow as a leader is to have the specific of you working out how you handle,
Yeah.
do I tell them how to do it really fast now, or do I help them grow? And that
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
learning is really important.
And I, you know, I'm sure it's like general advice is pretty, like, it's, I guess it works, but like uh knowing the context of who the leader is and who that person is that they're dealing with and everything around that is very important. Like, like,
Well,
not, yeah.
and actually, like, a thing I was reflecting on today with a client is, like, sometimes I've been in situations where my coach has said something that they've said to me before, or I've read them write somewhere before,
Right.
and yet they say it to me in the perfect moment, having heard the context or holding the moment that I'm in, and it lands in a different way.
Yeah.
And the difference between, someone generally saying it in the kind of, oh, here are the principles of management thing that you were talking about before, and
Right.
getting the reflection in the exact right moment is
Exactly.
weirdly different.
Yeah. Very, very different. And like eye-opening, right? It's like,
Yeah.
it's sort of like unlocks like an understanding that wouldn't have, you could read about something hypothetically so many times. I'm such a, I'm like born to be an engineer in many ways, or a creator, because I learn by doing and creating and tinkering. And so like the same thing is true with, even with management, is like, if I can't, like, you can give me these like high level things, it just doesn't make, and like it won't do anything for me until I like try to apply them or try
Yeah.
to work with them. Yeah.
And I think that, although, I don't know, one of my mentors is a guy called Miles Downey, so people can listen to him on the podcast if they want to go back and do that. He
Yeah.
comes from the school which originated with the kind of the inner game of tennis. I don't know if you've ever come across
Yeah.
that book, but
Love that book.
it's like I've never been as convinced by both that book and Miles that directional learning, like, it doesn't really work. And Miles tells this amazing story. I think I made him retell it on the show because it's such a, he's got a bunch of them like this, but he tells
Yeah.
this great story in one of his books about, he gives this kind of transcript of him coaching somebody at golf,
Uh-huh.
and he says, I can't remember exactly how he says it because it's quite funny. Let's see if I can do it. It's like, what stands out for you as you read that, you may notice that I didn't give any advice on how to play golf, right? I just asked
Right.
questions and reflected things. And he says there's two reasons for that. And this, by the way, the thing that's happened is the guy has, over the course of, like, I don't know however long it is, one lesson, one coaching session, has gone from his drive. I don't know anything about golf, so forgive me, everyone who's listening who does. Like, his drive being skew if and short to
Yeah.
straight and always 200 yards or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you may notice I didn't say anything about golf in this. That's for two reasons. One, I don't believe in directional teaching. I don't believe it works. And the other is I don't know anything about golf. And so he's just,
That's
all he's
amazing.
done is
Yeah.
like get this guy
Yeah.
to pay attention in the right way, and these things have
Right.
happened. And so I think that, like, I guess I'm invested in believing this because of the work I do. But I think that there's just a real truth in what you've just said, that it's
Yeah.
not just a creator or an engineer. It's most people actually really learn. Like, you can kind of mentally learn something, but to really learn it is
Yeah.
to get the insight at the right moment in the way we've been talking about, and then apply it, and then see that it works or doesn't, and then notice what's happening.
I think that's true for most people. I do have friends who I think they have that academicness tendency, and they have that tendency because they like playing with thought. What's the thought problems? Sorry, I'm like, my brain is not working right now.
Like mental
brain in
models
a
or
tank. A brain in a tank. What's that? Like a thought
experiment?
thought experiment. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's all right. It's early morning for Samir. He's like
Yeah.
got in early to do this call, I think. So, like, that's very very
Yeah.
excusable. Yeah, right. That's true. I noticed that I am sometimes that as well. Like, I actually
Yeah.
do. I love learning from reading when I can. But what I
Yeah.
really love, and when I notice things really shifting for me, is when I learn by reading, and
Yeah.
then I have to apply it, or I can apply those things straight away. Those are
Yeah.
the things that stay with me, right? For me
Yeah.
personally.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Same.
and
Yeah.
Samir, again, I'm sorry, I'm going to catch one more thing that I've just got, like, this little thing in the back of my mind from this
Yeah.
90-day experience you had. By the way, do you want to give a shout to that coach or that company? I don't know if that's interesting. People might be curious about who they are.
So that company is now actually been acquired by a different company, and so they don't exist anymore. It was called Allegory Inc. The founder actually became my first executive coach, but the person that I worked with directly was Taya Lakshminarayan.
Yeah, you're gonna have to send me that. Send me that
Yeah,
name separately.
I'll send her LinkedIn over to you.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. Yeah,
she was awesome. But all these folks are San Francisco Bay Area people. I other than the pandemic, I've been very adamant about getting coaching in person, mostly because for me, I get I'm very much a physical presence person in many ways. We're having a great conversation, but I think personally, I think we'd have a better conversation if we're sitting across from each other at a table, probably with a beer in hand. But I think so. I actually meet with my current coach once a week at a bar at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, mostly because I want to be in the place where I'm most comfortable discussing things, so I'm ready to be open. And so for me, that's in person and in a more casual situation. I know for example, one of my best friends is a coach, and he says, like, a lot of his clients probably wouldn't want that because they want to have that professionalism around their work conversations. And that I totally understand too. I know that the things that I need help with are less buttoned up in some ways, and so having the ability, kind of like similar to this conversation, the space to not feel constrained by what is typical work versus not is super helpful. So yeah, I've been meeting in person forever with my coaches. Where did I go off with that? So yeah, all my coaching is basically all the folks that I know in coaching that I've worked with are in the Bay Area.
Yeah, but it's lovely to it's always lovely to get the sense of who these people are, because I think that especially for new coaches starting out, you get a bit of the sense of that woman whose name, was it like Georgian or something? Her name sounds Georgian. I don't know. Like,
she's I think from Guyana.
Interesting.
But from Indian heritage families from Guyana. So, like, The name is definitely Indian.
Yeah, yeah.
Taya
Okay.
Narayan, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, like one of the things, so people like, it's just great to get this feel for this woman who
Yeah.
came from this strange background, and ended up coaching you. And the other thing I just want to pull out for listeners from what you were saying is, I feel a bit differently now, but when I was starting out, because I didn't come from a background in, I didn't have the cool hedge fund background that she had, which would have made me
Right.
feel very credible. But
Yeah.
what I love about that is she also really clearly didn't have the background that you were expecting or
Yeah.
that of you. And I just
Yeah.
think it's really important to remember that, and that her quirky stand-up comedian side
Yeah.
was really valuable, because a lot of
Yeah.
especially, I think it's true in the UK, but I think it's true in certainly some parts of the US too, this kind of sense of executive coaching looking a certain way, and maybe
Yeah.
that's because it did
Let
and has
let
done, but it's
less
less
in the
so
Bay
now.
Area. I would
Yeah,
say
right.
definitely less in the Bay
Yeah,
Area, but way more in New York for sure.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's really important to remember. And I love what you said about meeting in the bar as well. Like, it's interesting because I think it really depends on the coach, doesn't it? But also, crucially, what you're saying is on the client, on you, right?
Yeah.
Because if
Well,
yeah,
yeah,
go
part
on,
of it
speak
is
to
like
that.
it does depend on the coach, but that probably means that if the client is someone who would feel most comfortable in a bar and that coach is not able to be comfortable in a bar, then they're probably not a great fit.
Yeah,
Maybe go find a
right.
different coach.
Right. And I'm curious, just because this is like a practical one, from when I used to coach in public spaces, like, because
Yeah.
I quite liked it. Like, it was like there was
Yeah.
an energy to it. People would
Yeah.
like, I had this cool members area that I went to on the Thames, and
Yeah.
people would love coming there. They'd talk to me about the walk there, the walk back. And but the thing that jarred was just occasionally we would be too crowded. Like, there'd
Yeah.
be just people too close. So how is it in the bar? Like, do you ever feel like there's like
So
someone over your shoulder, or
we always go to like some bars in the Berkeley area in on a Tuesday evening. And
yeah.
so very like it's we choose some bars that are just occupied enough to feel like there's energy, but we're always getting a seat. So it's like
Yeah, yeah.
it's like well thought out almost by luck, or maybe, but essentially never had an issue where we feel like there's like too many people. And I know like probably some clients might be like there's definitely clients who are like so sensitive about all the things that they're talking about. And probably fewer and farther between, but there are definitely some of them. And for them, like talking about a lot of these things in a public space is probably not what they want to do. Um, I don't care. Most of the like these probably strangers, they don't give a shit about me. Why? What are they gonna? What are they
Yeah.
like?
They're
I
mostly
have
too worried about their own stuff to be worried about
exactly.
what Samir's saying to his coach in a bar on a Tuesday night.
Yeah, I think a life lesson that was pretty growing up in New York, and like so a little bit of background. My dad was a diplomat for Bangladesh, so I kind of grew up moving a lot. I'd mentioned that I lived in England for 3 years too, actually, but I lived in Saudi Arabia, Iran, and then got to New York when I was like 14, and I've been in the US since then. And so growing up around the world and also living in big cities basically my whole life, I uh, I I quickly came to the realization that most people do not care about your stuff. They care about their own stuff. So stop worrying about it.
I mean, like, as a little aside, it's probably one of that truth is
Yeah,
probably one of the reasons why coaching is so impactful, because you've actually got somebody there
right.
genuinely caring about your stuff, which happens
Yeah, yeah,
so
right.
rarely. But yeah, I totally get that. Samir, like, I'd love
I guess
to.
it's more like, like a lot of people are like worried what a stranger thinks about something.
Right.
And it's like the stranger's not thinking about you. They don't
No.
give a shit.
No, they've got like kids at home, or a job they're wrestling with, or
Right.
some other stress, or someone's just annoyed them on
Or they're
Twitter.
just having fun, like not even negative things. They don't care because they're like in their own thing. They're the hero in their own story. You are just an NPC.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Samir, like, you brought up that I guess that what childhood, adolescence, moving around a lot. What
Yeah.
what was that experience like, and how has it formed you
God.
now?
So
It's a big
uh,
question.
a lot of how who I am is very much formed by that. So I hated it at the time, but I'm so glad that I had that experience. I'm so privileged that I had that experience. Hated it at the time because moving every 3 years as a kid, and then being like, uh, you know, the new kid, the international kid, the kid if you're in like a place like Iran or like that doesn't know the language that well, or doesn't know the language at all when they start, it's like annoying, and especially at younger ages, very likely to get you into bullying situations. But it also, in the long run, the experiences were amazing. It taught me through those experiences how to be great at like winning people over in some ways. So like that part has been super helpful to my life. uh, Understanding the varied contexts throughout the world that people live their lives, and just like being that has made me just have like a lot more diverse perspectives just from the get-go. Uh, that has been super useful for me. And then my dad passed away when I was 14. Um, it's kind of weird to say that that has probably done a lot. That did a lot for me to be who I am now, in that experience being like a very formative experience in shaping the type of person I am now, and in a positive way, in a weird way. Obviously, as my coach would say, there's definitely other stuff in there that isn't necessarily negative. Like, for example, I tend to take on the caretaker role, or the person who's going to be the like the strongest person in the room, taking care of everything. Just because I was the oldest child, uh, and felt like, my mom was obviously a mess. Very sudden death with my dad, and then I think like I've taken that on as like a thing pretty much throughout my life, which is great, but also can be overwhelming at times. So, other than that, I felt like in a weird way those kinds of like early life challenges are have been very helpful for me being the like capable person that I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like so much. How can I say this? You're holding all that in what feels like a really balanced way to me, because there's a lot of struggle in there, right? I heard it in the story,
Yeah.
both
I mean,
the settling in and the
yeah.
and losing your dad. But I
Yeah.
can hear that you can see some of, like, it's that, that thing that people say, which when you're in the middle of something really hard is the most annoying thing in the world, but is true of pretty much every hard time I've ever had, which is
Right.
like you wouldn't wish those things on somebody else, but like they weren't all bad. Like change, growth came from them.
Right. Right. I wouldn't assume that every hard experience has positive,
Right?
uh, you know, positive aspects to it. But I'll say that at least from I mean, from some of my experiences, it has had positive impacts. But I could easily, like, for example, last year, there was like some like random tests for my wife that led the doctors to believe there's a chance she has lung cancer without any symptoms, blah blah blah. So there was like a couple week period where I was freaking out. And is there a positive to that experience? Hell no. And if she did actually have lung cancer, would there be a positive to that experience? Absolutely fucking not. there's no level of growth that I would trade for losing my wife.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is weird to say about your dad in some ways. Like, obviously, I would love to have my dad, and I would absolutely trade the growth that I have had because of that experience. But that's somehow like weird to say that like it's not the same as losing your wife. Yeah.
I guess, like, I mean, so, I'm lucky that my dad's still around, but his dad died when he was 10. And so
Right,
I kind of know pretty close, like the impact that can have and how it ripples
right,
on, it's rippled on throughout his life, and it's rippled into my life, right? Like
sure, yeah,
occasionally I catch, as I've grown more self-aware, I catch bits of me that feel like they are somehow an echo of what happened to my dad and my granddad.
yeah,
Um, but I guess one of the things I noticed about that distinction between losing your dad and losing your wife is, like, on some level, especially by 14, that as long as things go well, you're going to lose your dad, right? The worst case is you don't lose him because you die before him, and nobody
yeah,
wants that, right? So actually,
yeah.
best case, I heard the guy called Fred Kaufman, author who I love, say this once,
Best
right?
case is you will lose your parents at some point.
Yeah, like the best case is you you're definitely going to die, and the best case is you die after your parents and before your children.
Yep.
Like that's really what you can hope for at the end
Yeah,
of
that's the
life.
ordering that should happen.
Whereas losing your wife when you're in your late 20s or 30s is a different deal altogether, right? Like
Altogether.
we all know some people who lose their parents in their teens. Like
Yeah.
everyone who's grown through that age will know that. And like I wouldn't wish it on anyone.
Right.
And yeah, it is subtle. I mean, it's really different to get that
Yeah.
diagnosis.
I mean, it's that, and then you just know that like uh, basically after I was 18, lower even sorry, I went to college a little early. So after I was 16, 17, whatever, I didn't spend that much time with my mom. I have spent time with my mom, but like the amount of time you spend with your parents after you're an adult just gets, not as much. So while I want to spend more time with them, but it's like realistically not as big as part of my life. Like it's 100x difference, like more maybe between your spouse and your partner and your parents. That's just like how life works. And so it just in the amount of time spent, even it's like having that loss is immense.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then just to slow down on it, because you did say you look back on losing your dad, the kind of impact it had then. You've touched on it. Is there anything else about that you notice as you look back over the years, the kind of the ripples of that experience, both, I guess informing who you are now and what you're doing, but yeah, what do you notice as you look back?
Um, One of the things that I think my coach and I got to, we now call it the wipe, where I've gotten really good at like compressing negative feelings quickly and then wiping them away, being like there's no, at least rationally, there's no reason to like process this. It's best to just move on as quickly as possible.
Mm.
uh I've I think that is the case for many things still, but then there's a lot of things like grief that I think um now as I've gotten older and a little bit more uh understanding of like what my patterns are and how they could be better. There's just like, yeah, like that has served me well for many things, but it's probably for certain things it's probably better to loosen up and like for example, I lost my pet, that like cat, first pet cat who I'd had for 10 years 2 months ago. um Absolutely loved him, and so it was kind of brutal for me. And I could have decided to try to just move on, but one of the things that I felt like I did more now than I would have done 5 years ago is just like let the grief happen slowly, or initially just like let it happen. It was like the first 2 days are basically like a lot of crying, and then just let it happen, and then slowly just like ease off of it rather than being like, nope, there's no point of grieving, just move on. That I don't think would have been good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's amazing how these, again, it's a bit like we were saying before, excuse me, you can read these things, but it's only when you like, you're telling
Yeah.
that story now, or my client is telling me that story, or I'm noticing it with myself. We have these ways that really help us cope in a
Right.
really
Right.
tough time,
Right.
and they are useful until
Yeah.
they're not. And then
Right.
sometimes there's this chance to, I don't know, like flex it, create that little bit of extra space, which it sounds like you did, which I imagine helped you grieve, but also, I don't know, I imagine helped you.
Help me move on in the right way.
Yeah.
I mean, move on is weird to say, but like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I get
Yeah.
it. I get it. Thanks for sharing that,
Yeah, of course.
Samir, because it's like, it's a part of who you are, and there's a lot of texture in it. So it's really generous of you. And we're also getting this little flashes of the experience with your coach right throughout that, because you're noticing it. I mean, maybe it's partly because you know who you're talking to right
Yeah.
now, that he I think is present in the conversation. Oh, okay. And so we've got her here. Um,
Hi, Crystalline.
oh yeah, yeah. Tell us her name.
Crystalline Dillon. She's great.
Yeah,
I'm just saying hi because it was mostly a joke.
yeah.
She's
uh,
here.
Yeah, right. Always, always. And I love that because it does give you that reminder. It's the same with me. It's like, you have this little bit of this little inner coach sometimes
Yeah, yeah.
working, even when the real coach is busy doing something else or having their dinner or whatever. You said, Samir, that you were still pretty skeptical about long-term coaching when you finished that initial piece until the experience of the chaos of lockdown, I guess, and that's what we called it over here, like quarantine,
Yeah.
and in a pandemic. And you were working at Mattermark at that time. Is that right? Or was it
No,
by then? It was in your startup.
it was my previous startup called Journal.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was uh yeah. Uh
And
Also
so
CEO at the time. Yeah.
and so what happened? So what happened then to shift from the skepticism? Like you obviously, bought some more coaching
I
despite that. And what happened?
well, I definitely needed help like immediately then. But I also found that oh, like okay, I thought I needed help with like adjusting to leadership from video calls. But as we talked about more and more stuff, I was like, okay, I can be better at a lot of things that have nothing to do with um just how to be a leader in a different medium. Just being a better leader, period. And it's not that I wasn't good enough. It's more like there's always room to grow, and it's not something I'm like actively paying attention to. And so having someone who's actively trying to help me with that while uh personally also just having an accountability partner also to like be like this is something you should be actively thinking about, not just the short term, we got to do this for the business, we got to do that for the business. How do you prioritize sometimes your own long-term growth, your team's long-term growth, and balance the priorities of short-term productivity needs or whatever else? And so just like having someone who's like holding you accountable to thinking about that, maybe it was very helpful,
Yeah.
even outside of the pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. It does feel like for me that certainly in the client work that I do, that kind of situation is when that kind of coaching really comes into its own in my
Right,
work. When there's a long arc of somebody's
right.
career and their business aims and that kind of thing, but the day to day is also, all kinds of things come up, and that makes for a really
Yeah,
really
actually,
dynamic experience.
I'll explain why I felt like I didn't need as much before I got deeper into it. From a lot of my friends who are early leaders or startup founders or whatever, I heard that a lot of the things that they were focusing on because they needed help in that was inner game stuff, like personal inner game stuff, like imposter syndrome, confidence, communication, things like that. And um, not to sound arrogant, but like I didn't feel like I needed help with any of that for the most part. So like that was less of that made me think like, well, I they're very useful, but is this for me? That was really how I felt. And so um but like then like just like having it's less about me and more about like what I bring to the company, and less about managing my mental state and more about like how do I help. And that having someone who's helping me through it, coaching me through it, holding me accountable to it, and someone who I can bounce ideas off of for like, hey, I need to give this feedback to this person. What This is the situation. What is the I here's the outcome I want. The outcome I want is they understand and that we take steps to either make this better or whatever, rectify or whatever. And like just having a partner to chat, even like just bounce ideas off of for things like that has been immensely helpful. And so I think I had like a perception of coaching being one thing. And yes, it is that thing, but it's so many other things that was probably a big part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Really interesting. Really interesting. And so, I guess you've kind of hinted. Well, we've got some map of your career, right? That now, in the background of this
Right.
conversation so far. Go
Oh,
on.
can I sorry, one other thing that occurred to me, going back to the inner game of tennis example that you used. So how that coach ended up saying, and I know nothing about golf. Um, I now believe that that can happen, mostly because I've seen it, and I know of other coaches who are great at coaching people who are where in domains that they have no clue what they're doing. I definitely earlier on, younger me would have said, "How the fuck can someone coach me if they have no idea what I'm doing? If they haven't done it before or whatever like that?" So like that's a big part of it too.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there's some extent to which that is that's like there's a truth underneath that, because often, I mean, this would be a take. I mean, not that when I've been working with ICs moving into management roles, I felt out of my depth or anything like that. But it's like there is an extent to which there's more early in career, making those first stages, there is more value in, I would say, it's easier
Yeah,
for somebody to mentor you and teach you
right.
stuff that you don't know, because there's more
Exactly.
stuff that you don't know. Like
True.
about
Yeah.
literally, how do you run a one-to-one? Like it'd
Yeah,
be really
exactly.
useful to just be told like some good
Right.
practice on that. And when I
Right.
first learned that, I went on
Like a
I was like, oh
baseline.
my word, this
Yeah.
is like my one-to-ones with staff are so, when I was before coaching, I was like, they're so much better now. I wish someone
Right.
had told me this 5 years ago or whatever.
Right.
So there is that stuff. But as it gets more complex, you know, especially in the field you work in, right? In AI and machine learning, I mean, there are people who have been working in it longer than you, I'm sure, but there's no one who's made this company happen. And so, whilst you could
Yeah.
have mentors who have run startups and they could be teaching you stuff, the actual specifics of what you're dealing with, you
Yeah.
know,
Well, now I have a very different opinion. It's like I don't really need help with the AI ML stuff at all. Like
right,
that's not,
right,
I'm an expert at that. There's probably some like company building things that I do need help in, but that's not like coaching-y. It's more, it's like a different thing. Uh, like what in some ways the coach, what a coach does for me doesn't need any knowledge of being a startup founder, being a machine learning AI product creator, whatever. It's so much the other stuff, right? So yeah, like it's one of those things. It's like a misperception that I had earlier on.
yeah, yeah, and
Yeah,
not just you. I think lots of people.
yeah,
And so how did you? So it sounds like you've had three coaches, right? We know how you chose the first one, but I'm always curious about this. And one of the things coaches are always interested in is like, how do we create clients? How does that
right,
happen? And so I've had it a couple of times in the podcast where I've been able to like get into that with people, and I smell an opportunity to do that here.
yeah.
So the first time was like you went out and procured, it sounds like a company to support with
Well,
that specific
I,
thing, or
I
the
didn't
CTO
even.
did.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So like,
yeah.
I did very little of that. I think like at that point,
And that's
kind of like
often people's first experience of coaching is their company procures some coaching and they do it and then they love it or they leave it or they find it valuable like you do, but are still a bit skeptical or whatever.
right.
Um, and then I think you said that the next coach was the CEO of that company. And was this when
Yeah,
you were now by that point running Journal?
yeah. I was running a
Yeah.
journal, had a team of like nine, and got stuck in the pandemic. I'd known her, just kept in touch with her because she was running the company that I'd gotten coaching from. And she'd also coached a friend of mine. And so uh, it was like an immediate thought of like, hey, I should reach out to her. She's the owner and like owner of the firm, but she's the one who does the executive. She was one of the people who did like executive coaching rather than just like the management, like middle management type coaching, or like even like director type coaching. So had reached out to her. So that was like more of a I don't know as much where to look. Let's like talk to the person that I know who has is very good um and see if she wants to help and if there's a good fit. It seemed like there was immediately, and so we worked together for a couple years, and then the pandemic started opening up. She was operating out of Tahoe, which is close, but it's like 3 or 4 hours away. I don't know if you know the Bay Area well, but close by California standards, not by Oregon standards.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, but so I really wanted to be able to meet in person. So I was like, hey, Christina, like, have really enjoyed working with you, but I want to be able to meet with people with a coach in person. So that was the criteria. By that time, one of my best friends had become a coach who's doing really well. I didn't want him to be my coach because that would be an insane mix of things that we're basically coaching each other all the time over beers anyway, so like it's not the kind of thing that like I wanted to overlap at all. So by that point I know my coaching network had grown a lot more, so like I was able to ask for, hey, here's like my requirements, and I understood like what I wanted to get out of coaching a lot more too. So here's what I want out of coaching. I want to be able to meet in person. I want X, Y, and Z. And so met with like 5 or 6 um, coaches that were all potentially great fits, and ended up going with Crystalline. Just a lot of it was just vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you
Yeah.
remember? And again, this is a kind of weird
Yeah.
question for a coach to ask that you may not remember or be interested in. But do you remember, like, what about if you met with 5 or 6? I think that's a really interesting thing to do. It's
Right.
sometimes actually, as a coach, it's sometimes really weird. Like, especially if you don't know people are doing that. Like, I had like an enrollment conversation once, and I knew something was weird about it, but I had no idea what. I was like, this is weird. And at the end, the guy told me he'd basically met 2 coaches already, decided to work with one, and was just like keeping the appointment. It was incredibly weird. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
head that off
You
now, try
tell
and
that
head that
like,
off.
yeah. Right.
But so, I guess what I'm interested in is, what did you notice about, or looking back now, what do you remember stands out about the different ways that the coaches approached having that conversation with you? And what was it about your coach that led that you chose her?
I had a good conversation with almost everyone. So like
Yeah.
there was like no like immediate there were no negatives. Like I think it was more just like what felt the most positive is the way that I would describe it. And like what most positive for me was I didn't need someone at this point in my career who's going to be like giving me advice. Like so I wanted so it their credentials, their so it was like the complete opposite of what I just said about like it's like I don't really what I was looking for is like someone who immediately felt like they were capable of drawing things out of me. And like um who felt like they were really good at facilitating a conversation and could like poke at interesting things that like made my brain think, "Ooh, that's an interesting question. Like I want to talk about that." And that so like just weird abstract things, like feels basically.
Yeah.
And I'm like what for a very scientific, mathematical oriented, engineer oriented person, in terms of people, I like trust my gut a lot. Like I'm like very strongly like uh driven by just like I can just tell if I'm gonna get along with someone. I can tell if I should spend time with someone. I can tell if someone's feeling like you said, like you could tell like something was off about that client that you were talking to, that potential client that you were talking to, because maybe they're being squirmy or whatever. Like something felt off, right? I just get like these signals and I usually trust them. Not that I was getting any negative signals from anyone else that I spoke to, but with Crystalline, there was like the signal of like she's gonna be good at like finding things that I didn't know that I needed to have found. Uh it's sort of like we talked a lot about like there's look, I'm a good enough leader. I'm probably like very good compared to most people as a startup founder of 8 to 10 people, whatever. Um, so there's going to be a lot of things that I don't know that I need help with, and like I want someone who can like help me process that. And so that conversation went in like really interesting directions that made me feel like she would be very good at that. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It was a lot of like a lot of just like vibes.
Yeah. But I think that's like really important thing to hear. And again, for any coaches really, but also for
Yeah.
perhaps especially, and I'm sometimes thinking in these conversations of, because in some ways this podcast came from like conversations I'd had when I was first like starting out as a coach,
Yeah.
and just being really aware that you can kind of, it's really hard to get a feel for how coaching works. And I think that, like, whether they like it or not, or most people, that's true, right?
Yeah.
The thing in the end is vibes, like, but it's like deep vibes, right? Because what you're talking about
Yeah.
there is not it's not just, do I like this person, especially once you've met 5 or 6 people that you like. It's that exact thing. It's like, I know a lot, I'm good, I need to be drawn in interesting directions in my work, and therefore see new things. And actually, even in just this one conversation, that's happening, and I can feel that.
Right. Right.
Um,
Exactly.
and another thing that I'm noticing is, which I think is really true. My friend Alex, she used to say this, like, different coaches for different chapters of life, right? It's really
Yeah.
been true of me. I had a coach early on, who've also been on the podcast actually for listeners, Joel Monk, and that 18 months that I worked with Joel, like transformative in my life, like so much now that I've created, that I'm part of, that is part of what makes me come alive. I can trace back directly to that engagement, and
Yeah.
I was sure when we finished, I think the third, we did 3 6-month engagements. I was sure that we would work together again soon,
Forever. Yeah.
and yeah, it's never happened again. And it's not that it won't, but it was just like, I just think, and your story is really clear on
What
that
was
as
it about?
well.
What was it about the the types of coaching or the conversations you were having with Joel that like at the time felt transformative, but then since you haven't needed to go back to the well for?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, Joel's an amazing coach, and I think that there was an extent to which it was like, a little like in different ways the times you've been talking about are. It was a time like ripe for learning and development and growth, because I was just transitioning my career, starting my coaching business. Um, so there was a way in which that was there. He also had a like really beautiful kind of again, there's a little echo of what we've been talking about, the kind of earlier on mentor, what like big brother, uncle feel to
Right,
him,
right,
that
right.
at that moment was exactly what I needed, because I
Yeah.
needed like that little bit of like, you know, just like, okay, here you are. I'm reaching out, if people can't see, towards Samir. It's like,
Yeah.
here you are, Robbie. I'm going to just pull you here, or I'm going to turn you
Or
that
like
way.
just like turn you this way. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, that balance, that presence, somatic work we were doing, it opened up lots for me. But then the next phase, one of the next phases for me, and again, people will know this, but it's probably worth saying actually, because I think it's really interesting. Really, the next coach I had was Rich Litvin, who I think you know, because you've built a Rich Litvin
Well,
bot, which,
I don't know him.
but you know of him. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'd love to actually chat with him because we're good big fans of his work.
Yeah, maybe come back to that. But
Yeah.
like what Rich did was push me in a completely different way, like really interesting work. Like the container really stretched me in a very kind of what would we call it? Like will-powered, create my business move,
Right.
whilst the
Right.
container of the coaching was beautiful and gentle, as well as pokey.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, set me up in lots of ways again, like opened lots of
Right.
doors. But then after that, what I needed, and again, some people will know this, but I think it's nice to spell it out. Regular guest on the podcast, Katie Harvey, she was then my coach for about 2 years. And what I needed then was a little bit more like what you just described as with that current coach, like just space, really.
Yeah.
Space to, I mean, to a certain extent, put myself together in the right way through some
Right.
tough times, but also really just space to allow everything to run, but faster and feeling more comfortable and better than it would ever definitely ever felt otherwise. So that's a little
Yeah.
flavor of that.
That makes sense. As we were just talking about this, and me just reflecting as we're just talking about my like and just like my experience with like bigger coaching name brands now, right? Like folks like Rich, who are like more well known, probably even like Joel, right? I actually think weirdly, and this is like a very off the cuff hypothesis. I'm curious what you think about it. That like the more well known and bigger brand the coach is, they're actually more useful earlier on in someone's career because of a few different things. Like they're trying to be like generalized, like they're trying to generalize further and further away. And they feel like that big brother, big whatever, big sibling, big mentor, guru. They like you when you want that kind of relationship, you're probably earlier on in your career. Whereas and like they're not looking for wins, they're just trying to be a guru. Whereas maybe at the stage of the career that me and you are in, we're not like clear clear winners, but we know what we're doing in many ways. And so like that initial help type phase is gone. And maybe what we need now are people who are there with you almost as partners, like they're thought partners. They're not like gurus, they're thought partners. And they want the win as much as you do. Because for them, it's like I get better at coaching by helping them. And it's less like, oh, I'm so good, I'm giving you advice. It's more like, no, we're figuring this out together. And if I help you figure this out, then I get better at coaching. And like that I think it's sort of like you almost go back to like you want to find someone earlier in and closer to you in their career where like you're both like trying to get a win.
Yeah, really interesting. I definitely think, I mean, like, I think I would advise people that if you're gonna learn from someone like Rich, for example, like he
Right.
has an amazing body of work, but part of what he's doing now is teaching it, right? So it's
Right.
like a really different thing to
Well, he's teaching
coaching.
coaches how to coach,
Right.
rather.
And
So like getting
so
a,
if you can
yeah,
get that, the earlier, in a way, the earlier
right,
you can learn from, and
right,
like learn from a master. Like I'm really grateful that I did that early on. Just, how I run my group coaching now is just from watching Rich run the group coaching that he was doing with me, and then gradually making it mine over the next 5 years or whatever. Um,
right.
if you can, the earlier you can get that, like there are just some things you can learn as a
Yeah.
coach
And
that get them
accelerate or set a
early.
baseline. Yeah.
Exactly. I think it's like it is then really interesting. I think Joel, like Coaches Rising has grown a lot since I worked with Joel. I don't know so much about his individual coaching practice. I'm sure it's going great. It felt a little less like that then. Um, although yeah, it felt that was a little different. And then I think it's really interesting because I do think I don't know what your experience has been. You've been coached a lot like I have. The stuff that I'm dealing with now, like the way that my mind works in coaching, Katie, I mean, like she used to do not that much, and yet she was doing like a lot,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it would be like the faintest of nudges,
Yeah. Yeah.
really,
The
to
butterfly
move
effect,
my
I'd
thinking in
say.
new places or to shift the energy or whatever it was. A lot of the time, sometimes she would be really present, and that was beautiful too. But she was always present in the kind of coaching present sense, but really like Katie would be in
Yeah.
the call
Right.
as
Right.
opposed to just being the kind of the
The
container.
the mirror, the reflection, the yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
And then it's interesting. So I'm working with Miles Downey as my coach at the moment, who I mentioned before, the inner game guy, and yeah, he's doing like again, it's really interesting because it's a lot of that. Again, it is a lot of course, if he's driven by the inner game, he's built on that kind of model. That's all there. And then it's like, I just think it's a fascinating art, isn't it? Then it's like the occasional little
Yeah.
like set piece or story. Like you probably can't see it on the floor here. There's this massive like flip chart bit of paper with like normal sized writing on it in biro about the next phase of my work. And that's because Miles told this story about when he was writing one of his books. He's like, I realized I needed a big bit of paper, but I couldn't write in big letters on it. I needed to write in normal sized letters in order
Uh-huh.
to get everything onto the bit of paper.
Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right.
Right.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that
I use
weird
whiteboard.
story. Yeah, exactly. That would have worked as well. But that story, for some reason,
Uh-huh.
unlocked something, which
Yeah.
meant that I'd filled a flip chart with with
Stuff.
ideas and thoughts within a couple of days. And it's like, that's interesting. I mean, I'm just fascinated by it, really.
Yeah.
So it's for me, it hasn't so much been um necessarily closer in career, because in a way, Miles and I are probably like Miles has been coaching for longer than Rich or Joel or Katie, um, or the other coaches that I've worked with. But it is what's happening in the conversations is different.
Yeah. 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 That's super. I mean, it's just like I have like I have a different lens of caring about these things, obviously as a coach, as a customer, but also as a leader. A great leader is also a coach themselves, right? Obviously, in some ways. So just thinking about like what's the right way to help my team grow. So I think about less, maybe like less um deeply as coaches do about coaching. Definitely less deeply than coaches do. But it's like it's something that like I'm like always thinking about the fundamental like weird principles and on which humans operate.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. And so, Samir, I want to do a little bit of dot joining
Yeah. Yeah.
in your journey. So, like, I want to get to Heyday because it feels like we're
Yep.
there now. Because I would really want to ask you some questions about leading in Heyday now. But
Yeah. Yeah.
before that, just join some dots for us. So you created Journal and worked on it for several years. So,
Yep.
and I think that was with Sam, who's also your co-founder
Yeah.
at Heyday, right?
Sam and I have been working together for 9 years across 3 different companies. Mattermark, where we met, we were directly working together. We just became really good friends. We collaborated on some projects because I was head of machine learning and data engineering, and he was head of content marketing. So like different, very different like areas of like very little daily collaboration, but a lot of like idea. It's a small company. It was like 50 or 60 people at its biggest. So like the early people knew each other really well, but we were just like really good friends. Both of us were sports fans. We liked I don't know, music, and like we got along in a lot of different ways. Actually, the best friend that I was talking about is actually a founder of Mattermark. He's like a coach now. So a lot of tight-knit people came out of that company. Journal, so came out of this is probably like not super interesting to your audience, but I'll just to ground
Yeah,
it in
be great to get
um,
a little bit of context. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So I was head of machine learning. I created at the time, pretty innovative way to search. Mattermark was a company where the main product was a database of private company information. So we had like millions of companies where we had structured information about those companies, like how much money they raised, where they're located, what the industries were, like what we like projected revenue numbers, like a whole bunch of stuff that we did. We sold to investors primarily as a customer, and a lot of what my work was to be able to structure unstructured information like news articles into like, oh, that means they just raised this new amount, and like and figure that out, and like have basically a pipeline of algorithms and machine learning and AI that could figure out a lot of these things. But then another thing that I worked on was a lot of our customers wanted to be able to say like, hey, I just want to look for gig economy companies in the Bay Area. And when I search gig economy, I'm not getting the right, or I want to look for like dev tools companies in the Bay Area or dev tools companies in Asia. And basically, the issue was that our search at the time was very find these exact words in the description of the company. If it doesn't match, then it won't show up. And so we're like, okay, well, it needs to be more topical. We called it semantic search, which is, I mean, if you're following any of the AI stuff nowadays, is like table stakes. But back then, this is like 7 or 8 years ago, we came up with a novel way to do uh, search in a way where the meaning of the company would match what someone was looking for. So if someone searched gig economy companies, Uber and Lyft would show up, even though they in their description never actually said gig economy. And so that worked really well. And we started Journal with the idea that, hey, like this could be applied to anything. This like technique of creating searchable content that's based on like topic in the way Google is, rather than search almost everywhere else. And so Journal was started with the idea of Google quality search for your own stuff. And so I personally like a I'm very passionate about automation, AI, probably why I'm in machine learning to begin with, but also about enabling people to leverage knowledge and information in more productive, efficient ways. Like, so whether it's like learning more or leveraging that learning more to do more, and then not get stuck in like the rote stuff as much. So Journal was basically based on the idea, hey, we have so much shit all over the place now. This was like 6 years ago, so it's like even worse of a problem now. But or 7 years ago, and you have emails, you have documents, you have conversations on things like Slack. You have all this stuff, and it's hard to find everything. So that was the idea. It was an idea that was interesting to a lot of people. A lot of people tried it for free. And again, as a first-time business creator, we were excited by the fact that like we had tens of thousands of people using the product. And then we start to try to figure out how to make money off of it. And it turns out no one really wants to pay for it. It's like not really solving enough of a need in the right way for people to be like, well, oh, I don't really want to pay $10 a month for that. Like we only got like 3% of people wanting to pay. So that was like not in anywhere near enough to like feel like, and so we had to shut that. But we also felt like we learned a lot and about what people actually need. And that's how we got to Heyday. And Heyday is meant to be our we want to be the AI thought partner for knowledge workers in general. So we started again as pretty general, but at least this time we started with it's a paid product. And it tries to integrate with like your existing workflow, and it's trying to be proactively helpful rather than you having to change your behavior, more AI forward. And so that got us a step forward. We had 400 plus paying customers early, some interest, early interest. Then we got stuck again, and this time our realization was it's still not like something that, again, it felt like a magic toy rather than a magical change to how someone does their work in a way they were like, you cannot take this away from me. Um, and so that's when we narrowed our focus even more. We're like, hey, like we still want to be long term. Our goal is to be AI thought partners for all kinds of knowledge workers, but we got to narrow. And so that's when we interviewed a few different types of personas, like people who like coaches, financial analysts, journalists, content marketers, like lots of different kinds of people, and then ended up picking coaches as the group that we really wanted to help, at least in the short term. And that's how like Heyday's been focused on coaches for the last like 8 or 9 months.
Nice. Thanks so much for giving that context and joining some dots. I just realized we should probably do, because I know some people will have been paying attention to the AI conversation,
Yeah.
but we should probably do some definitions for people who haven't. So could you do like I know it's like, how do you summarize something complex in a short space of time? But could you do AI and machine learning? Give us some definitions for those to
Yeah.
catch people
So
up.
AI, I'm sure almost all of you heard of at this point. If you haven't seen ChatGPT, I'm sure I'm jealous because that means you can somehow avoid all the news in the world, and all of Twitter and all the stuff, and your life is probably better than mine. So that's amazing. Good for you. But I assume that most of your audience knows what AI at a high level is: artificial intelligence. ChatGPT is the thing that probably many of you have tried. That's a form of what we would call uh, language models or natural language processing, which is like a form of AI that's for like very focused around text and language. There's computer vision, which is a form of AI that's about imagery and videos and stuff like that. But so machine learning is really like it's more like the science behind all the things that end up being AI. So it's uh, it's like physics to rocket science. Like rocket science is an application. Like AI is a thing that we do. Like we're trying to create automation, artificially doing things that humans can do. Machine learning is like the theory, the math, the behind like much of it is probabilistic math. Some if anyone is out there is familiar with like matrix math, linear algebra, like a lot of like optimization math, a lot of math, essentially trying to boil things down in terms of automation to, in terms of language, maybe just predict what the next word should be. Anyway, so weird long spiel about AI and machine learning, but the majority of the goal for AI is typically to automate things that humans do, in ways that maybe humans don't have to do anymore. And so there's lots of high level philosophical debate about, well, what does it mean? There's like artificial general intelligence, which we call AGI, which is what does it even mean? And this, I think there should probably be an epistemological conversation about like what does intelligence even mean, and what does it even mean to be sentient. So lots of stuff that we don't actually understand, I would say. A lot of what people would say about AGI is it's a sentient intelligence that has its own emergent properties. Like it does things that the human programmers did not tell it to do. We are nowhere near that, in my opinion. A lot of people say a lot of random shit about like it's close. I don't think so. But if it
That's
happens,
like the Terminator Skynet kind of
that could be the
fear
lot. I
comes from
mean,
there.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like what if something is truly sentient, then it will make its own decisions, and like it could make decisions that means wipe out of humanity. Obviously, it doesn't necessarily have to be. I would assume that the vast majority of AIs don't want to wipe out humanity, but I guess being afraid of that chance is probably not a bad idea.
And if you're writing a sci-fi story, it's fun to play with that
Of course, it's
as a
more
possibility.
fun to have a. Well, actually, her. I don't know if you've seen the movie. Her is a Great movie about, I think, more accurate in some ways of like what AI could likely be. In that, like, even then, it's like it's a sci-fi story written by people who aren't really, but it's, I think it's more philosophically close to what I think will likely happen. Is, oh, benevolent AIs were like, I I don't know. I kind of want to do my own stuff. I don't want to kill people, but I also am like, I don't want to be like beholden to what you're telling me to do.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and so that's like the more likely thing in my opinion,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
like
So
they just
interesting, isn't
become
it?
their own like why would they be wasting time like just doing what we would tell them to do? It's like that becomes like slavery.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Yeah.
it's so interesting, isn't it, that because it's genuine. I mean, if people haven't checked out ChatGPT, like get an account, have a play, unless you want to avoid it, because you could still do that in the way Samir says, and maybe it's good to be
I,
unplugged. It's nice to be
I
unplugged, but
this is
it
where I will have one very definitive statement. Avoiding it is a bad idea. It's avoiding it is the bad idea in the same way like avoiding email was in the early 2000s, avoiding the internet was in the early 90s, and then avoiding the smartphone was in like the 2010s. Like
yeah.
you're just going to be behind and you're going to seem like a Luddite. And then eventually you're going to do it anyway because you have to. That's just like how it works. This is not like crypto. This is not like some scam. This is going to be changing everyone's lives.
Yeah, and if you play with it, like it feels like sci-fi. Like it reminds me of, I mean, the way that we talk, I mean, I know I brought it in, but you almost can't help but reference any number of
Yeah,
sci-fi
totally.
characters and stories when you're in this, because, when you talk to ChatGPT, and my most recent one was I was trying to get it to help with me with my accounts, and it gave this really like, the answers were just fantastic because it was like, I can't definitively tell you what this mysterious reference in your bank is, but this could refer to this, and this could refer to this. And
Well, I
this
mean, it's probably making up everything because like it doesn't have access to any of your
right,
actual,
exactly. Like,
which by
but
the way, Heyday would. So
yeah, which I think is really interesting.
yeah,
But yeah, people should play with that because it does have the feel of well, and we can talk about Heyday as well. Tools like that have the feel of Star Trek or something to me, and
yeah,
just so much potential. And again, people who haven't checked it out, my brother, who actually, maybe it's no wonder Joel had a big brotherly feel because my brother and Joel are really good mates, and
oh cool,
he works at Coaches Rising, and one of the things my brother's been playing with is I can't remember which one it is, one of the AI image generators,
oh cool,
and it
stability,
is.
or a Mid Journey or one of those. Yeah,
Yeah, Midjourney, exactly. That's the one, and it is amazing to see, to instead of to be able to, as long as you learn enough the
how
language
to
to how to tell it to do different things, then
yeah,
you can get the kind of, the image you spend hours searching for on Shutterstock,
yeah,
you
yeah,
can have just come back
amazing,
to you, and then you can tweak
amazing,
it and get it back, and these
yeah,
things
amazing.
are, like you say, it's hard to, until you've seen people playing with it or played with it yourself, it's hard to get the feel for how much it is that thing you just described. One of my
Yeah,
clients, who's a developer, actually, he said, I can't remember how old he was, in his mid late 40s, I think. He said, if he was just starting out, he would be pouring all his energy into working out exactly how to work with the AI systems so that they can do all the bits that they can do really well, and he can be focused on just the bits that a human needs to do.
yeah.
And that I ever since
That
he
is
said that, that gave me an amazing view on this whole
yeah.
field, really.
That's my entire career's basically been my like focus is like I mean, I started studying it early, and obviously it's developed a lot in the time. But like even in the early steps, just like building like chess playing AIs or building like basic AIs and like or just like AIs to predict what stocks to like it started making me think, yeah, like this is just the beginning. And obviously, but as a person in computer science, software engineering, and machine learning, you're like, okay, like we're going to be following Moore's law, which is computing power or computing capabilities doubles every like 5 years, basically. So like, these capabilities doubling every 5 years, like this is how should we steer this, and how do we think about uh what are the right things to automate away from humans? Like I'm just passionate about, I have uh adult diagnosed ADHD. And so that's not even really that relevant. It doesn't change my life that much, to be honest. But it's more just like I'm very binary. I'm either super procrastinating, lazy, or extremely, extremely driven, to the point where I could like work, 3 days, 18 hours a day, easy, no problem, things like that. So like what I want to be able to do is automate away all the annoying things that make me want to procrastinate, because most of the time they don't actually need human creativity. The things that make me want to go dive really is like, what are the creative problem solving challenges that are coming up that are, or even the human things, like what are the human things that I like, who are the people I like talking to and all that stuff, and like how do I like talking to customers and whatever. And so I always think of AI as like, how do we automate away the things that we don't want to do, or the things that are tedious to do, or the things that a computer would do better than us. Like there are definitely things computers do better than us, and so like why should we do it, and then just like, for example, like uh you are not an artist, and so therefore you cannot create the same things Midjourney can create. Maybe an artist and a true artist would be able to do it better than you, or Midjourney, but like you're not an artist. You could hire an artist, and it will take a long time, and you'd probably have to give them the same kind of description that you'd give Midjourney, or you could use AIs that can like get you a good enough version that's going to be much better than you doing it. So why wouldn't you do that? Why would you waste time? That's not your area of expertise.
Yeah, and
Either outsource it to a person or an AI.
yeah, and there's a few important things in here, isn't there? One is the kind of principle in there. It's a little bit like, it's another one of those leadership challenges, isn't it? It's like, how do you do the things that you are uniquely, if we go back to the delegation conversation,
Right.
it's like, actually, in the end, the dream is that
If you're
management is
super
not just somebody doing things worse than you. It's like you find somebody who's as good at doing the things
or
that
better.
as good at the things that they're doing as you are at the things that you do best. And then
Yeah,
together,
yeah,
if those
yes,
things are
yeah,
different, then
yeah,
the whole picture is a really different thing. So
absolutely.
part of it is that it's like, what are the things that computers can do much, much better than a human?
Yeah,
And I guess that one of the key shifts for me when you hear about some of the AI stuff, and obviously I'm not as much on the pulse as you, and I'm way behind most people who are interested, but I've heard some of those things. As you start to get a sense of what it might be able to do, um, that possibility, like, for productivity and those things, just starts to explode. But the other side of it is, if you think about Midjourney, I don't know how much it costs, but it does make those like customized high quality images, I imagine already, and as time goes on, even more accessible to even more people.
yeah,
When and what you, I guess, we can think about this with art or music, you know, my feeling would be, but I'd be curious to have your reflection on this. And this is partly from my brother-in-law as well, who's interested. We were talking about art, and he said he got some AI generated art. This is a little last year sometime, I think, because he had a really specific thing that he wanted, and he looked around for it for quite a while and couldn't find it. And he got some AI to create it, and it's great. It's perfect. It's just what he wanted. So we had a conversation about that, and it was this sense that I got this sense that, like, really there's no creative cost to no AI is going to replace Picasso, right? But you can replace the people who take stock photos for, they're not really art, right? And then that person who's taking the stock photos to make money can potentially do something different. Now, there's lots of complex market stuff in there, but
yep,
I'm
yep.
curious,
That is
jump off that in
that's
some way, Samiur.
yeah. You put it in the basically the exact way I kind of think about it. It's like the that person is now, we have to figure out how to do this as a society, which that's the problem. Where the 80th percentile of good enough for many things will be automated, uh because like we're like the AIs can learn from the best people to get good enough to be 80th percentile good. And so 80th percentile good also means it expand, and at a much cheaper cost for many things like, art and things like that. So it means that like the ability for people to uh you know use those things also massively expands. Like you're not going to be, if you wouldn't pay $200 to an artist to I don't know if most of your audience is in England or not, so I don't
Mixture,
want
doesn't matter. But
to
yeah,
assume that the currency of the United States, but $200 to do something for you, where there's no, like, even if you had the money, this is like a small enough use case that it's like it's not that important, so you wouldn't do it, and so you just like go find a stock photo. So this is replacing, hey, I wouldn't even do this thing, but now that I can for like 1 cent or 10 cents or whatever, of course I'll do it. And I can get a much better version of it than like a stock photo that doesn't really work. Um, However, also there's like the complex thing of like, there are people who are doing good work right now, just good, not great, that could probably be automated away because uh unfortunately, like, just being good in when an AI can learn from people much better than you and can get pretty good at what you're doing, and you're not necessarily innovating, you're not coming up with new ideas, you're not doing problem solving, which AIs aren't necessarily good at, or strategy or things like that. You're doing a what I call like a branch task. Like you're down and you're doing a thing. You could be like a great artist, or not a great, a good artist, let's say like a good game artist or something, or a good designer. And what you're basically doing is you're taking instructions and doing something. You're not like helping craft a design strategy for that company based on what they need. And like that is not going to get automated away. But then the lower level stuff, I think the positive way to think about it is, cool, those people can now like try to spend time doing more human creative things, uh, and more higher level strategy things. But the negative side is we're going to have to go through a shift as a society to deal with that in the same way that we probably did during the Industrial Revolution when a lot of jobs started to get automated away. Ideally, like, this is where society and governments have lots of like retraining, lots of, I don't know, other things to support
well, I mean, like
situations.
a lot of career coaching,
Yeah,
there's gonna be a
right.
lot of people
Transitions.
potentially transitioning
Right,
their careers in lots of
right,
ways.
right.
Um, so some two things are coming to my mind. One of them is it really reminds me, a really formative experience for me in just thinking about how things change was I once saw a publisher, a guy called Stephen Page, who was the CEO of Faber and Faber, which is a kind of medium-sized British publisher.
Uh-huh.
Um, and he was giving a fireside talk for a group of leaders that I was running a program for, or coordinating a program for. And someone asked him about Kindle, right? Because it was like probably 10 years ago. And
Uh-huh.
so Kindle 10 years ago was pretty new. And I mean, not new, but like
Yeah,
it was the, it being everywhere was new,
yeah, yeah.
or newish. And, he said, what do you think about that? And he was like, I think it's been great, which was really not what the questioner was
Yeah.
thinking he was
Was
going to
trying to get
say,
there.
because they were like trying to get him to be like, oh no, it's all over. And what he said was, have you noticed what's happened in bookshops? You go into them now, and every book is a work of art. If you go into
Yeah,
a book 10 years ago,
yeah,
the books looked terrible. And what's
yeah.
happened now is, if you're going to buy a physical, if you want the cheapest possible way to get a book, buy it on ebook.
Right.
If we want to get someone to come into the shop and buy one of our published books, we have to make it something that is
Look like something I want to put on my bookshelf.
something truly delightful. You see this with music
Yeah.
as well, right? Like,
Yep. Like
at
a
least part of
record
the
harvest.
resurgence of vinyl has got to be
Yeah.
down to that.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like that when you're
I'm
talking about
an
that.
avid reader and a music fan, and I have bookshelves of books now that I've read in Kindle form, but then bought in physical form because I want to show them off. It's like, it's because I want people when they come into my house to like know what I read.
Yeah.
So it's both a little bit of an ego, and both also like, this is signaling. This is like,
Yeah, but also they can pick
uh
it up then. Like, that's one
yeah,
of
they
the,
can pick
like,
it
I
up.
don't know what you're like when
Yeah,
you see someone pick up one of your books off the
yeah,
bookshelf. It's super exciting.
it's super cool. Yeah. And I also have a vinyl collection,
Yeah.
again, of records that I typically listen to on my high quality, like, I'm a music nerd, so I have like audiophile, like,
Okay.
equipment and all that stuff. But like, uh, so like, I don't know if you've used Tidal, but like Tidal has like high quality, lossless music and like so like I care about that stuff and it's better in digital form and it's more convenient in digital form. But I love the vinyl records because they look
Yeah.
so cool.
That looks so
Yeah,
cool. That looks so
yeah.
cool. And so I
Yeah,
guess
exactly.
when you talk about the 80th percentile, that's one of the things that always comes to my mind. It's like there might be people listening kind of panicking because you feel like, oh shit, what if
So
I'm in percentile 0 to 80? So this
coach,
is going to be the question, Samir, that
yeah,
you're just about to answer it. So
yeah,
just let me ask it really. The
yeah.
broad question is, what isn't going to get automated? And sub question, am I about to be AI'd out of a job?
So coaching, I would say my fairly informed opinion is that coaching is one of those that is it's almost all the things that actually uh is going to be really hard for this generation of AI to automate in a good way, especially folks who work long-term coaching relationships, long-term executive coaching, long-term like coaching that is less transactional, is just not going to get automated right now. Or if it does get automated, it's to expand access to the folks who can't pay $200 to $1,000 an hour. So your job is not going to get automated because it is almost to the by almost 100% what your superpower is to be human and is to be able to do the things that an AI cannot do. And so, but on the other hand, there are millions and billions of people who could probably do well with access to coaching that cannot afford it right now. And so, if we had expansion of some of the like the wisdom of Rich or into automated AI coaches that like uh in put in like you know you're you can't afford it, you're early on in your career, or you're in somewhere else in the world where yeah you're good but like you can't afford you know in Bangladesh, even if you're a high paid executive, you can't afford a US coach. Like it's just like very different. Like the so like for those folks, being able to access the wisdom of really good, like 80th percentile coaching effectiveness is still interesting. They obviously will not get the intimate, like, let's like hold space to find like all the things we just talked about that makes coaching actually great for me. How the fuck would an AI do that? This doesn't make sense. Like, so that's why I'm like, coaching is I'm more likely to get automated away than a coach.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, and also I need to do a thank you because that question, we have a coaches journey community, and sometimes
Yeah,
listeners, members suggest questions, and that was a question from Alex
yeah,
Swallow.
of course.
Really, he was asking, is coaching an AI protected industry? And what I hear there, I think I've heard you say that on a different podcast as well, actually, is, and it makes complete sense to me that, and you hear, I think it's happening already to some extent that you can kind of do coaching. There are some coaching bots or whatever, and you can do some with that. And look, there's
Yeah.
some really
And there's
like,
therapy bots and there should be. Like, why not?
yeah, and
Like
we
I
like
just
you can
think
imagine it because there is some, there's some like, and I noticed myself slipping into it both. Like I can imagine, I don't know if you've actually got this plan for Heyday. I can imagine an AI like setup set of questions for a call and follow up set of questions because the time when I'm most in set piece mood is the
yeah,
start and the end of a call, and it's so
well,
I can
so
imagine bits of
we can
that, and
talk
you can
about AI in two different ways.
yeah, yeah,
One is completely trying to automate a coach
yeah.
and like replace the coach. And that's the one that we're just talked about, which is like, is that gonna happen to
Too much of
coaches?
it's human. Yeah, yeah.
Too much of it's human, but there's probably worth it to do some version of it so that it introduces access to some version of coaching to a lot more people who don't get it.
Right. And
Other
let's
thing,
just catch that because I think it is really important that then, again, it's for people who are thinking, oh no, what if I'm only as good as that bot? Well, like this is a harsh truth, but it's like,
yep,
then get better because
get better,
you
or go
absolutely
do something
can.
else. Yeah.
And I think that is, again, we get with this stuff, the
it's a
bit of
very
it.
it's a very low baseline
Right, right,
because
right,
I'm
right,
like
right. Yeah.
it's not the same thing as like a software engineer where some of it is just like task given, or even like a designer,
Yeah.
like an artist, right? It's like task, especially like when you're doing things like just like do a stock photo or whatever, right? It's like take task, do task that was valuable 10 years ago and it's just going to increasingly not be valuable
Yeah.
with a code. Like part of I've said this before, part of what coaches do is to like tease out what the right questions are. not to give the answer.
Yeah.
AI
Yeah.
is very good at when you have the question or the task to do something.
Yeah. And
For any job where to define what the question is the job,
yeah.
that is going to be really hard to, yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I had Claire Pedrick, who I mentioned before, and Lucia Baldelli on the show a few episodes ago, late last year. They have a new book, The Human Behind the Coach. One of the things, the stories they told was like sometimes they do a lot of what do you call it? Like examining for passing coaching credentials. So you have to get to the high level. And they told this story. I just couldn't imagine this was true until I slowed down and really thought about it, which is that sometimes you, as an examiner, you will read the transcript and it will look like uh, great coaching. And then you find out that they've failed. And then you listen to the audio or watch the video of the session and you know why they've failed. Because
Right.
the connection, like it might be that the AI could ask the
Absolutely.
speech marks textbook question, but if you listen to the person, then when that question is asked, the whole thing jars, it makes no sense, it doesn't follow at all. And so you get that sense from their story and what you're saying
Right.
of like how different these things could be.
Yeah, and we were even just talking about this, where like going back to earlier point in our conversation, you could read something that was the right thing and that was like very monumental, and you're like, cool. But then when it was the same thing could be repeated back to you when it's like in the right context at the right time, done skillfully, and it will cause a completely different level of realization and growth, like literally. And so how could something that is just respond, like its job is just to respond to you, know when to interject something at the right moment? It's just like not how these things work right now. Yeah, so
Yeah, yeah, so
on the
interesting.
other hand, you were
Yeah,
just getting to a
yeah,
point.
yeah. Let's
Yeah,
catch that. Let's go
yeah,
there now because I think it's really interesting. But as we do that, like I found it on Twitter somewhere, talking of whiteboards, this great thing that was written on a whiteboard by I think you or Sam, which said something like it was from early on, I think, in your maybe in fundraising or something. It was memory slash brain in the modern world. People aren't built for it.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
wonder, as a like intro into the way that AI can support us, if you could just speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, okay. One of the things that a computer is going to be always better at than you, that is a human, is computers have perfect memory. Uh, they will not forget anything, and they will remember the right thing the right way. And if you can search it, obviously everyone has the experience with Google. Google can search the whole world, and worse and worse these days. But let's talk peak Google back in like 2010, 2011,
Wait,
2012.
catch that? I think I could guess, but why is it worse and worse these
Like,
days?
I don't, so this is it's less about the product and more about the company. Like the founders aren't there anymore. It's run by someone who's a CEO who's less, I don't know. It's more optimizing revenue kind of CEO. And so there's more ads, there's more, the experience is just like make more money,
Yeah,
rather than how are we the world's best search engine all the time, right?
yeah.
So
Okay.
I think that's the bigger crux of it.
Yeah. But sorry,
Uh,
so sorry to interrupt. But it was like
yeah,
you were saying, it can do a thing that there's just no obviously from Google. If someone as an
yeah,
example, which everyone knows, like
right,
obviously there's no possible way that a human could comb the internet for the best hit for Robbie Swale, even, let
yeah,
alone something more like unique
esoteric,
or
yeah.
esoteric than that.
Yeah, exactly. So we know that, right? And so now apply that to more and more advancing algorithms and AI and things like that. And like in one of the things that humans are uniquely bad at is like remembering things that might be useful. And so that's what's one of the things we started Heyday with, is how do we remember things for people and then bring them back at the right time. And be like, oh, like I'm starting to work on this piece, and I forgot that like I'd read it or listened to a podcast that would be like perfect to like reference for that.
Yeah,
And
and it's
like
so funny, isn't it? Like even some occasionally, I get a little flash of that when I half remember the thing, but
right,
that doesn't give us any clue about all the times I've completely forgotten the
right,
thing, right?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that's like even basic stuff.
Yeah.
And
But
then
just to
like
say, Samir, like, because again, for people like who haven't been in this conversation before, I heard Dustin Moskovitz from Asana, I don't know whether this was like last year, an interview he did saying, so people who don't know him, he was involved in Facebook from early days, but and Asana, it's like a kind of company
Task,
project management
yeah, it's like a
system.
task project management system. They're,
Uh,
they're one of those
uh,
like, yeah,
but having played with Heyday, I can see how the thing he was talking about, which to me felt like the future when he was talking about it last year, is probably here already. He was saying, think about all the times in meetings in a company that there isn't that they like half the people think the one half of the people are going to do the action and the other half think the other people are going to do
yeah,
the action. No
yeah,
one's clear on it, or we didn't get to an action in a meeting. If you think about, imagine if you could just change that in a company from that happening like in every meeting, which everyone who's been in a meeting knows happens in pretty much every meeting, to that happens in no meetings, or all those little things get
yeah.
caught. Like they're
That's
just,
interesting. That's
oh yeah, go
interesting.
on.
So I'm just gonna say, obviously, Dustin Moskovitz, very accomplished, built an amazing company in Asana. They are huge and they do a really good job and provide a great product. His lens on of AI is going to be very narrowed to how does AI help me think about how to put in more tasks into my system?
Right.
Instead of being like, hold on,
I should also say
is
this is me remembering off the cuff from listening to an interview 6 months ago, so it's
no, no,
possible
no,
that
but
I'm horribly misquoting him.
it also totally makes sense for him to think about it that way. Like
Yeah.
it's like task management is a hammer, and I'm making this hammer even more easy to use. But like the right thing to do is to like step back and be like, okay, why do we even need to have people assigned to tasks? What do they do? And how would AI help first principles rather than like not like being like, oh, we're already doing these things. How do we like smooth over the edges of those things? That's definitely an improvement.
Yeah.
But the next level of improvement is, well, instead of having a task management system, why don't we have a task AI that literally just like is you don't manage your tasks. This thing just tells you what when you need to do it, what they are. And like, sure, that'd be hard and there's a ways to go, but like that that's like an evolution of a thing that isn't being constrained by the current version of how people deal with things.
Yeah. Lovely. And so maybe give us a sense of that. So um first, maybe it's interesting. So, because I love the frame that you gave, which is I've heard you and Sam say it before. The idea is to have the AI thought partner for knowledge workers, and then you came to coaches being the place to start. And then I've read one of you say, or maybe Sam said it to me when we spoke, because he was a part of setting up this conversation. Thanks, Sam. That the way to expand the way part of your plan is you do this really well for one group and
Yeah.
then see how that goes and then build that out from there, and each time you do it you'll know more about that.
Yeah.
What led you to coaches first? And then I guess the question
It's
I
a
want to
little
get
bit,
to is,
yeah.
you just gave a kind of idea of the first principle thing, like how has that kind of thinking created the product that you've got now? Like how can we support coaches in using this kind of technology?
Yeah, I mean,
So there's
well,
a lot of
let's take
questions in there.
step by step. So how do we get to coaches? I think I was talking about like we wanted to focus. We had a few initial clusters of customers that were using Heyday, and so we talked to a bunch of different ones, public markets, financial investors, uh, entrepreneurs themselves, journalists, content marketers, and coaches for some reason. And so
Yeah, do you remember why coaches were on the list at that point?
they were just, I don't know, some of them were using it. I think they might have been like mostly using it as like solo entrepreneurs who were like, hey, I like do a lot of reading and like I just want like something that helps me bring back like interesting, like someone like you might have found the initial version of Heyday interesting because you do a lot of reading and you do a lot of research, and it's like it's not coaching focused, but it's like, oh yeah, like I remember reading about this thing about inner critic or the inner game of tennis, and like who's the other person who was talking about that, just like basic stuff like that. Nothing optimized for coaching, right?
But so at that stage, what's Heyday actually doing? It's like it's to give people an idea. It's
It's
reading what I'm reading, and then
it's
it's
reading everything you're reading. It's integrated with your email. It's like it's the way that it pulls in the information is still pretty similar to what it does today, except It didn't have a Zoom integration at that time. So mostly all about reading everything you're reading, documents,
And then
emails.
I decide I'm going to write about the inner game of tennis, and it stops me forgetting that Miles told this great story about the inner game of tennis.
Yeah, it just tries to bring up helpful context as you're doing things. That was the main and it didn't make any assumptions of who you were and what you were trying to do. It was just like, oh, you're doing a Google search about something. Here's like stuff not in just in the public web. Here's stuff that like from your memory that might be interesting to what you're doing. You're trying to write you're trying to Google Doc about something. Oh, here, maybe here's like, or you're reading an article and it's like, oh, here are like other articles that you've read that reference this article, or just like helping you have more memory context as you go about your life. Very general. So again, that's why we're like, it felt like a cool tool to a lot of people rather than feeling like this like must-have thing that has changed the way someone's working.
Right.
So,
And again, just to go back to the story you told about journal, that's one of the things. It's like, it's a cool tool, but it's not so important that I need to pay for this.
yeah. Yeah, so basically we made a slightly cooler tool
Yeah.
that was didn't fully use the lessons that we'd thought we'd learned. But then the next evolution was like, okay, no, we really gotta learn more about like the theory was you have to know about what people need in their job and optimize directly for that rather than and the way we think about it is we have the building blocks to quickly help many different kinds of jobs, but we need to learn what their actual needs are and then adjust the workflow. So for example, having that introducing the Zoom integration, introducing the aggregation of information about your clients into one place is a coach specific experience. It also applies to many other people. Anyone, we think of coaches as basically like a special case of a consultant, someone who helps many clients, and they need to understand clients, like their clients and their like the things that they're helping their clients with at a deep level. So like that could be naturally the next larger group of people we go after. But also like as a founder, I get a lot of Heyday just because the building blocks we've built, sure they're like focused around helping coaches, but they're generally helpful to almost anyone who does a lot of thinking work, thinking knowledge work.
Yeah, and one of the things that struck me when I was learning a bit about Heyday was, so one of the for people who haven't checked it out yet, the Zoom integration that you're talking about, that Samir's talking about, is essentially, as I understand it, Heyday like listens to a Zoom recording and it transcribes it, because this is how it works. I think I heard you say on another podcast, and then it creates a summary, a post-session summary. Yep. And what's really interesting about that, given the context of what we've been talking about, is I was trying to work out when this was before this conversation. I think it was probably in 2020 sometime. I was really trying to get into the idea of the zone of genius and like, what is mine and how do I get into that more and more, trusting that as I do that, better work is done and more success is had. And one of the things that I was doing a lot of the time was like writing session follow-up. Yep. And in the end, I slowed down with the 80-20 rule, and I was like, 80-20 on my coaching. What is the 20% that's creating 80% of the value? Well, it's more than that. It's like almost all the value is actually created by the conversation that I'm having. And so really I need to be doing that as much as possible and spending time writing. And I write well and I like writing. So I have this problem that I spend time writing really intricate like follow-up, which is lovely. But actually, if I'm really interested in,
probably don't read it.
Right, most of them don't, and so what my solution to it was to stop sending those things and to just record the sessions, and like people who want it can find those key minutes. But what's interesting is the slightly unsatisfying thing about that is what you said is absolutely true. Most clients didn't read it. Some clients did and loved it. One person was like, "This is like having a book about me, that I can read in this email thread and come back to." And there's this slightly lost thing, which obviously I do for clients sometimes, where it's like, it is useful to have somebody to like nag you in a really low, gentle way to say, this is what you said you do, so one of the things that Heyday does, and I can really see, like, if it had been around 3 years ago in that way, as I was making that decision, I'd have been like, oh, this is a neat way to solve that problem, because I can get and what's nice about it again that people won't have you can play with it on a, is it like a 2 week trial that people can get?
Sweet
So
trial. Yeah.
you,
Yep.
you can play, people can play with it if they want to. But what's nice is it's like coach specific, right? You can feel that in the
Yeah.
summary. Now,
So
of
we
course, it's I guess it's gonna get more and more
yeah.
fine-tuned in that, but it does mean that like it can be really on point, particularly with the action stuff. If we go back to that slightly, the Dustin Moskovitz thing, but also what what I was just talking about, like catching those things and giving them back to people is one of, if I was to 80/20 on the notes, right?
Right.
The if I was to continue writing notes and think 80/20, well, one of them would be a little reminder of what we spoke about and what you said you do. And
Right.
plenty of clients
Exactly.
find that useful, right?
Yeah. So a little bit of a window into how we got there. So many of your uh, many of the folks in your audience may have tried things like Otter or Fireflies or Fathom or any. There's like tons of transcription summary software, right? A thing that you mentioned is that like they are a very general, like we will join a meeting, take a transcription, and then just describe what happened, right? Or summarize maybe even the key things said very well. But that is like the view of taking every meeting and you know, treating it the same, no matter if it's like a sales conversation, a one-on-one, a introductory call, a date for Zoom dates back in the pandemic that people did.
Right.
I crazy, but whatever.
Yeah.
And like, you know, if you, and then a coach client conversation where so much of the context is from previous conversations, from emails, from all the other stuff that like, how could you understand the shorthand that's happening between a coach if you didn't know the entire history? So the way that we approached it, there's a little bit of a is both like, well, what like we are well set up to do this because as a as trying to be the coach's digital memory, we already know a lot about, or our concept is not to treat each call as a call, is each call is just a point on the journey with the client. And so you're just like summarizing that new point and not
Mm.
summarizing just the call in its like in isolation. We're we have the context of everything that's been happening with that client and like what their key goals are, what their existing action items were. And so that means one, we were able to do higher quality takeaways because we all that context is there, but also we did a human process. We worked with like 10 different coaches, and our process was it worked out really well where me, Sam, and Brendan on our team, we basically worked as, we signed NDAs with these coaches. We worked as back office assistants, doing essentially listening to all their calls and doing the transcribing, doing the summarization ourselves for the coaches, and trying to figure out what else do coaches value but don't want to do. And throughout that experience, our job was basically, okay, we're going to be free assistants for you, and our job will eventually be to replace ourselves with AI. So that way we built like deep understanding of what is high quality, what are good notes. Because when we first started, it'd be like the coach would respond and be like, that's interesting, but that weren't my key takeaways. And here's like what I would be. And then, or like, okay, those are the right takeaways, but the style in which you did it, I wouldn't want to send to my client. And like, just like that rapid iteration of a human style let us to understand what would be good for coaches. And then we could target it ourselves when we're creating our AI. So having that deep understanding is what made us create something that is actually like shockingly good, is what most coaches will say, because they just this is one of those things that like
Yeah.
most coaches will be like, well, you know, I don't really have this problem. And like no offense, again, this is what you came to this realization, your skill is not writing great notes, your skill is having, your superpower is having insightful conversations. And so if you were trying to be the best coach possible, you would focus as much as possible on that, and then kind of not do as much as possible of the rest. Part of having great conversations is to have great memory of what was happening previously, so that you don't, like, one of the things I hated sometimes with working with some of my coaches is that like I would have to repeat myself because they have 15-20 clients, and like you might not remember what was the most important thing for this client, and it's like, let's like get and that was kind of annoying. And so it would take away from the magic of the conversation in some ways. So like if there's a thing like Heyday, which both like 95% captures the right things, so that the next, even if you don't send it to your client, right before your next session, you get an email. Here are your upcoming sessions for the day, and here are the things to like. Here are the most important things for you to remember that's been happening with this client.
Yeah, and I got to say, like,
yeah,
that is, so although I don't send notes to clients anymore, a bit like I'm doing in this conversation, I scribble stuff down during a call, and
yeah,
some of that is like on the surface, I'm doing that mostly because I want to have, sometimes I want to have the exact language that somebody used to give back to them. And
right,
for some reason, I think it'd be a fun. Some coach mentors would tell me like, trust your listening, you'll be fine. Don't need to
yeah,
take notes. But I like to do that because sometimes it can be really powerful. And then the way I use it though is exactly that. It's like to really try and get back into someone's space ahead of a call. And yeah, right. Like I can really imagine that this is, like you said, like what is it that an AI system can do that a person can't? Well, one of it is, remember literally, in fact, if you've had Heyday or something like it for the whole time you've worked on, 6 months,
exactly.
every word that was said in
Everywhere.
6 months of work, right? So
Right.
that is really
And then
interesting.
no one wants to read 6 months of transcripts. It's like
Yeah.
it's like 3 books. It's like the job of the AI is to extract the 90% of the right things,
Yeah.
so that you can just like look at it at a glance and be like, oh, I know what I need to, like what this client's state of mind is, or what
Yeah.
I'm working with.
And you can answer this question. It's really interesting about Heyday or about just these kind of systems generally, because I was playing with one actually for creating podcast show notes the other day,
Yeah,
which is again, it's the similar sort of idea. It's like, let's take all this stuff and let's make it specific for this niche. Don't listeners, we haven't used it yet. Everything you've read has been written so far has been written by people, but it'll happen soon. So as I'm guessing that one of the key things is, you talked about the coach saying this isn't written in my style yet. I mean, I don't know if Heyday does this or other software does it, but presumably as time goes on, it'll learn from what you
yeah,
like. I mean, for example, when I was playing with Heyday, one of the things I was like, oh, I get this. But if I'm sending my notes, like I'm a little bit more like your comedian coach than this
yeah,
sounds.
right,
And
right.
what I would need is to just like tweak that way. And I guess like that feels like again an obvious thing that the machine learning can do and
Yeah,
will do as time goes on.
so it already kind of does, in that, like, so we have a workflow where you can edit the notes. We always think of, like, again, especially for high, we're trying to augment people who are really good at their jobs, right? So they're already very good, and so we treat it as like you get like 95% of the way there, but you are the human director that will finish it off. It's like you get a phenomenal, you finish it off, and then you send it off. So you have that UX that ideally between 2 to 5 minutes you can like edit the notes and then send it to a client. A lot of times, coaches who haven't been sending things to clients will almost always just send the same thing. Coaches who have their own style, they will edit the language to become more them. And our goal is to like learn from the edits, like how that coach would actually want to talk to their clients. It takes time to learn that, as you're doing it. And honestly, I'd say it's not as good as it should be right now, like understanding the style of the coach's like actual communication. And so I can see someone like you being like, I don't want to really send this to my client. But someone like you probably still would get value from this, having it come back to you the next time you're meeting with that client. So
Yeah.
even if you don't send it to your client, it's about like, oh, well, when I get this back to me, I don't need it to be in my voice. I just need it to like remind me of like the facts of
Yeah.
the things. Yeah, of the important things.
Well, and I got to say, like when I had the trial on, my clients mostly had that reaction that you said coaches have, which is like, oh wow, this is way like how cool. This is way better than I was expecting it to be, and this is really
Right.
really useful. Samir, we're almost at time now. It's been like time's flown by. Thanks so much for like
Yeah, it's been
just
a great
bring,
chat.
bringing it to this conversation. There are kind of two things that I like just want to invite you to touch on. if you want to, but you could also choose one. So the first is like, it's a really, you were really clear, right? That you believe that avoiding AI is the wrong move because in the end you'll have to come to it. So
Yep.
what are the like, I had this a little bit as a question from one of the members of the community, Joey, as well. Like, what are the concerns that you've seen coaches particularly have with using AI, whether that's Heyday or something else, and like what what do you think about those concerns? And the other thing I'm interested in is because we kind of touched on it earlier and said we might come back to it, is like, what are the you've been looking at coaches from a very interesting place. We talked about, well, from a few places. We talked about one, which is as a client, but as someone who's looked in at what coaches are doing from the side in a really interesting way, what have you seen? So there's two quite big
Yeah.
questions. So choose for you, like whether you answer one or both, or how you take it.
Yeah, I'll do it in order. Both are very interesting. One, with what are coaches concerned about? So one of them is like less about AI, and it's just like simply about a lot of coaches, the nature of coaching is that you're diving into some potentially gnarly topics, and they're sometimes worried about just the security and privacy of any software, the Heyday or anything else, where recording's happening or like processing happening, what's going to happen, all the way ranging from some concerns that I guess like if you're high level enough, if you're really working with Fortune 500 execs, which some of our coaches do, then you have the concern of, well, what if I get subpoenaed? And if there's records, like my clients will be like like they'll be, if I have recordings, then those recordings can be searched and blah blah blah. I would assume that 99.9% of coaches should not have to worry about this. They're not getting subpoenaed. I don't know if you know any coaches that have been subpoenaed. I don't know how the UK legal system works.
I mean, me
Probably
either,
similar.
but like you say, it's like confidentiality is a really, and security is a really valid concern. In fact,
That's just
I was just
software.
thinking just then that in fact, I probably, because I'm an ICF credential coach, the ICF code of ethics means that actually, like, I'm actually like literally they could kick me
Yeah,
out of the ICF if I wasn't
yeah.
being
If you leak
responsible
something,
about that. So
yeah, yeah, of course.
it's real stuff. That kind of extreme example sounds incredibly rare,
Yeah,
but I guess more
exactly.
likely is just, yeah, but it makes sense, right?
Well, it's
Confidentiality,
like,
that stuff
so with
is a
AI,
real
I think
concern.
it's like a secondary concern that I think is real. And you should, anytime you're using AI, you should be mindful of this, is that the software that you're using, the AI system that you're using, are they using your information to learn and train their system in a way that's going to leak potentially information or your secret sauce to other people? Um,
Yeah,
for
and
example,
I got to say, on a really practical level, how would a person, how would I actually know that? Is there any easy way to do that?
that's
Because it sounds like a tough thing to, I mean, not an easy way, but a
that's a really good point. It's really hard to tell, like
yeah,
from the outside. Um, like one, we say that, hey, our incentive. So also, I would say one very high level tip. If something is free, you are the product. So
right.
do not use free AI tools and put in information that's confidential. Like it's just, you have no terms of service protecting you. There's no reason for them to not use your information. When paid products like us, like our incentive is to continue to help you, so you continue to pay us. So there's at least like, not only is it's there's just like an alignment of incentives. Like we have, our goal is to not piss you off, and in all the ways, and provide you value without pissing you off. And so um we will do that. We'll prioritize that. And so that's one really basic thing. And then like, just try to look at like the like security and privacy policies of these products. Like, we try to make it pretty clear. It's that like, hey, we will not train on your information. We will, if we're doing stylistic training for you, it will be only for you.
Mm.
It's a very core thesis of ours, is that, not thesis, principle of ours, is that where we will limit learning to help a person to that person. Not, we will obviously try to take the principles that people are telling us
and try to like improve our systems to like apply those principles better. But that's very different than like the direct, this is how Robbie helped this client. That seems like a good way to help clients. Let's like help all of our coaches do that. That's just like not something we technologically do not allow that to happen. So like looking for things like that. Yeah, I think that's a legitimate concern. And like when you're trying to use these AI tools, if you put something into ChatGPT that like involves your client's information and you're not a paid user of ChatGPT, they're going to use that to learn stuff. That's just how their terms of service is set up.
Yeah.
So don't do that.
Yeah. And that's useful. And a great reminder of that thing about if you're not paying, you're the product, right? Like that's a great rule of thumb. And what about the other questions, Samir? So you've been looking at coaching from the side. Like what have you noticed? And I guess I'm asking this on
point me in a direction, because that's a very big area.
Honestly, I'm not sure I can. I'm just really curious. Like, if you like, or maybe this is it, right? What is like, either in a kind of admirable way or in a like weird, quirky way? What are just some things that you've seen from like, maybe some of this is NDA, right? You can't do it for those people, but you're getting feedback from coaches all the time. You're seeing what they're doing. What are some like weird stuff that coaches do that you just think that's weird? And what are some like really amazing things that you see?
So admirable. I've worked on so many products, right? And with so many customer bases and all that stuff. Coaches, by far, the nicest, the best first product customer that I've ever had. Just because one, that like their whole job is to give really constructive feedback.
Right.
And so they can both be nice and tell you exactly what they need, which is amazing. Like it's almost always either one or the other. Like it's like rude people who are smart, who are just like just annoying to listen to, or nice people who won't tell you why something isn't working for them. And so coaches were fantastic as like a customer of a product, because they were very skilled at like just telling you what they needed, but without being an asshole. And so that's awesome. A lot of them are solopreneurs, and so tight iteration cycle. It's like really great to work with someone who makes the decision and is the end user of the product, and can give you and has the time to give you feedback and all that stuff. And so that's been fantastic. Weird things I've noticed about coaches. So let's see. Some coaches, so we started with anything that's like very quantitative is like not very appealing to coaches. So we started one of our LinkedIn ads with save 10 hours a month writing notes, which from the outset would seem, for a non-coach, would be like, oh yeah, that's a great value prop, right? Like $40 a month to save 10 hours a month, amazing. That's $4 a month, $4 an hour, amazing. But for coaches, we changed this, like we tried a different headline, which was capture all the meaningful moments, and that works so much better. And I think that might be true for a lot of people, but I think it's way more true for coaches, that they care way more about the aspirational than the pragmatic sometimes.
Yeah, how interesting.
That's great, but it's like something quirky, I would say.
Yeah, and there's probably like everything, right? There's something really like there's something even admirable about that, really. That's why coaches are in it, right? For the magic, for the moments. But there's also probably for most of us. No, but I also think there's like a, like everything, there's a shadow to it. And the shadow is like sometimes coaches need to like pull themselves together, quantify some stuff, and work out how they could save 10 hours or, have 10 more potential conversations with potential clients, right? Like sometimes getting serious like that is
another great example. So when we have a AI writing assistant that helps like suggest topics to write about, helps you go from 0 to 1 of a draft based on a topic. And the idea is coaches are phenomenal at having insightful conversations. Not all of them are great at turning that into written shareable content. And so what if an assistant are like, I don't want to help anyone write fucking all the, like, the people who write ChatGPT, like write a blog post about this for me.
Well, like write a high school essay about this,
Yeah, exactly. Like I don't want to enable anyone to just like spew out nonsense. but I definitely want to enable people to be able to share their insights more frequently, more at a more rapid pace, their original actual insights. And like that's the thing that we want to do with Heyday. When we talk about it in a way where we're saying leverage your insightful conversations with your client to share more content, to grow your brand, to grow your business, blah blah blah. That does not land as much as leverage your client conversations, extract your wisdom to share more wisdom with your community. That is way more attractive.
We're also
And
sweet,
that is
aren't we? How cute. Yeah.
That's like a quirk. I'm like, so it's like every coach I talk to, they worry about having a consistent client flow.
Yep.
And yet when you try to advertise them about something that will help them have it's like not as attractive.
So
but you tell them like, oh, help share your insights to your community in like a more generous way. That is something that's more interesting to them from the outset. And I think it might make sense because they want to buy a product that understands that that's what they aspirationally care about. But like the reality is what they're going to get out of it is it will also help them grow their business. And that's why they really should do it.
Yeah. And look, I mean, probably Samiur, I can't quite do it in this moment. If we were to double click on what you've just said, there's like sales principles in there that are really useful. But yeah, I think it is. Like, I think it is tapping into why people are really there.
Yeah. As an entrepreneur, I have to be like, I'm building things that are awesome for people, but I also have to fucking shove it down their face because like, it's just like the way business works. And I'm happy to do it because I know this will be useful for them. And so like I'm trying to get them to use it. And I do not mind using whatever tactics necessary to get that to happen. Yeah. I think sometimes coaches don't want to get dirty.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. It reminds me of one of my favorite Steve Chandler stories, who was, Rich's partner writing The Prosperous Coach. And he says something like, imagine you're walking in a desert and you have some water and you see someone who needs some water, like, what would you do? Would you think, I'm just not sure if they want water from me, or like, maybe I'm not the right person to give water to this person. Like, I don't want to be too pushy about my water, right? Just shove it down their throat, or give them the water, and they can, they can be okay. So I think, you're right. I like that this is
someone like choking and then being like, should I give them CPR? Like, I don't know if they would want my lips on their lips. Like, they're gonna die.
And so, we definitely need to channel a little bit of that. I think most coaches listening will need to do that.
Like, late stage liberalism, leftism has its own problems, I think.
Absolutely does. Samiur, you've been so generous with your time. Thank you. We've covered so many great topics, and I love that we've got to a really, like, in a way, we could have made it more practical, to a really practical, like, coaches, like, you can afford to channel a little bit of shoving it down their throat sometimes, and also meet people where they are, because like that's also what you're doing. Remember, when you're talking about your work, right, you may want to talk about it one way, but actually, like, you can bring some of that. But in here, there's been so much.
I would make to coaches. I would hope that you think you're doing something truly valuable for your clients. Wouldn't you want more people who've never had coaches to know about the value that they could get from you, so that you could do more good?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, Samiur, thanks so much. We've covered so many great things in this conversation. It's been such a pleasure to have it. And yeah, look, best of luck with everything. We'll put links to you and Heyday and all the things we've talked about in the show notes, including the coaches that you've worked with. But yeah, just really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I love this conversation. The time just flew by.